Hey everyone, I'm Andres. Welcome to an episode of The Critic Corner. If you're not familiar with The Critic Corner, that means you're missing out on my exclusive podcasts that are only at www.theandresegovia.com because this is the kind of stuff that I do not post on YouTube and I do not post on the Andres Segovia Show podcast proper. But this episode is an exception because I felt I needed to address Tenet because there's a lot that's been talked about it, both pros and cons, and I felt I needed to weigh in on it, particularly because I did an episode earlier this year where I brought on a buddy of mine named Russell, and we discussed all of Nolan's films. We ranked them based on the number 1 all the way to 10, when we shared our list respectively, and also did a follow-up episode discussing the Dark Knight trilogy that was not included in those top 10. That was in preparation for Tenet. Now that Tenet's out, available on digital DVD, Blu-ray, 4K, and all that stuff, people have been able to see it, and they come away with the pros and cons of the movie for themselves. So I felt now it's proper for me to talk about this. So in order for me to talk about it, I asked my other buddy Travis to come on and talk about it because he and I had differing perspectives about the film. So here's my discussion with him, but let me just forewarn you now. One, this is filled with spoilers, not just for Tenet, but basically the entire body of work of Christopher Nolan, because you cannot talk about Tenet without weighing it against his other properties, just like everybody else has. Everybody talks about his other movies in reference to Tenet, so it's unavoidable. We discuss the other movies, and we do go into deep discussions of plot points and key moments in certain films of all of his body of work, The Dark Knight notwithstanding. So just giving you the warning that here on out that there's going to be a bunch of spoilers about a lot of his movies, and there are a couple of things I want to clarify. So at the end of my discussion with Travis, I'll be end capping it with a couple of clarifications that came up during my conversation with him that I did not clarify during the call with him. So I wanted to clarify it here. Anyway, without further ado, here is my conversation with Travis regarding Tenet and the best and the worst of Christopher Nolan. But let's get talking about this Tenet thing. Because the issue that people have generally had, they say it's a high concept that falls flat. And I guess I could summarize the arguments in this way, because if they say high concept, and he was more focused on the concept, so it was more style over function, if you will, to use a design choice there. And I actually disagree, for various reasons because of the subject matter of the film. But I think you represent the general audience, and when I say general audience, I actually mean like the maybe 50 people that got to see it so far.
And I was happy to see it. I want to say I was very glad, especially during this year, anything new, especially from Christopher Nolan. So I was actually grateful that I did get to see it. It was on the highlights of this year.
Yeah, but you were telling me that your issues with the film is that there was really no character or character growth per se, at least for the protagonist, whose literal name is the protagonist. But yeah, it's just some people didn't see anything in terms of growth there.
I don't know if it's so much growth. He just didn't. I was trying to think, because I remember when I was watching it, because it's a fairly long movie, and I was 20-30 minutes into it, and I was aware at one point, it's been a little while since I saw it, but I remembered I was like 20-30 minutes into it, and that I was having trouble getting into it, which I usually don't have any issues, especially with a Nolan movie, and it just wasn't. It wasn't bad. It wasn't like, oh gosh, I could just leave the theater. But I realized I just wasn't. I wasn't like locked into it, and there was something about the main character, the protagonist, since that's his actual name. He just, I'm not quite sure what it is. I'll have to watch it again. He just never grabbed me, and I don't have a problem with an archetypal kind of character. A lot of times you'll have a kind of like a silent kind of character that represents something, maybe in like an assassin movie, or like a samurai movie or something like that. But I felt like a lot kind of rested on him, that you needed to be drawn to his character. And if anything, I thought Robert Pattinson was a better part of the movie. I don't think I feel really bad at forgetting his name. What's the actor's name who played the protagonist?
Oh, Protagonist.
Yeah, okay.
No,
Yeah,
the protagonist. Let me get his name. 'Cause I keep trying to call him Denzel. He's
because I
Denzel's
can't remember his
son.
name. Yeah, I know. I was tired of calling him like and Denzel's son. I was like, what's his name? I keep forgetting whatever his name is.
Yeah, and I should know it by now, man. I said his name so many times. Like, dude, what the flip is your name? I know you're Washington. John David.
John David. Okay. For me, I felt like there were three problems with the movie. Him, uh, this is all gonna be about people's names I don't know. Him, Kenneth Branagh, who played the villain, and the lady who played his
Wife.
wife. That trio didn't pull me in. I wasn't drawn to the protagonist character, and even though I thought the lady that plays his wife actually did a good job,
No,
Kenneth Branagh is always an interesting character. Their dynamic didn't work for me, and so it didn't pull me into it the way like when you're watching Interstellar and the Matthew McConaughey Murph relationship kind of worked in that movie. You had something where, one, his performance alone, even if you thought there were problems with Interstellar, I feel like his performance alone almost kind of overshadows the other problem. You almost forget about the other problems because it's just so it just pulls you in, and then you had that dynamic. Some of the dynamics in the movie just, I'll have to go back and watch it. They weren't bad. I didn't like, oh, I gave a bad performance. It didn't draw me in, and it just didn't work for me because, like I said, I like movies. I put something like maybe like Blade Runner, where you have like Harrison Ford, whose character is kind of the strong silent type. So it wasn't about that he didn't have a major character arc, or that he didn't have big showy dialogue scenes. It didn't pull me into the espionage kind of world. I realized like 45 minutes in the film, an hour into the film, I was intrigued by what was going to happen with the time travel stuff, especially when it kind of started getting back into into some of the stuff that I was like, okay, I'm interested where this was going to go, but I wasn't really interested in what was happening to the characters so much. And it was a problem for the whole movie. Like I got done with it, and someone said, well, "What'd you think of it?" And I was like, "Oh, it was good. Did you enjoy it?" Yes. Did you think it was like, where would you rank it? And it was weird because I was excited and I was talking with people about it, but I also kind of immediately knew, I went, it's not up there with how I felt about, and I could name several of his similar films, even like The Prestige. Which I was more drawn into with the back and forth between Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman. Something I felt like it had some of the same problems that I had a little bit with Interstellar. He keeps going bigger and bigger with the concept of the movie, and he has a little bit of a bad habit, I think, of letting things get a little bloated because he's so technical. He's figuring out his timelines and where things need to be, that he doesn't focus on some of the details that he does when, say, you go back to an early film like Memento, where there's just tons of little character details. You can watch that for the sixth time, and you're like, there'll be some little tiny motif, and you just have these tiny little things the character does throughout all the scenes. Like that, he was just really interested in the character, and I think I'd kind of like it if you would go back to that. Like, go, okay, I've gone big. I'd almost love it if you would go back and do a really kind of detailed film again, because he's kind of like. He reminds me of like Stanley Kubrick. You remember like how Stanley Kubrick, he developed such a reputation at one point that it was almost like he was kind of setting himself up for failure, where critics weren't happy with what he was presenting them. Like, you do some film, and it couldn't just be a film. It couldn't be good. It had to be amazing and unique, and he would deliver something that was amazing and unique, and yet there was always a problem with it, and then it would take 10, 20 years, and people go, once they would accept it for what it was, they go, oh, well, this is amazing. But they'd see The Shining and go, that wasn't scary. And you try to explain to him, well, that wasn't the point. That's not what he's doing. No, it wasn't scary. And you see Barry Lyndon. That wasn't exciting. Well, that's not what he's... So I'm willing to give Interstellar a chance. Like, maybe I'm not accepting it for what it was, but those were my genuine first impressions of it.
You mean Tenet? You said Interstellar.
I'm sorry. Yes, Tenet. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I have to... Okay, this is almost like a triple layer defense and discussion, because there's Tenet the movie, Nolan's works as a whole, and the most obvious comparison, which would be Inception, I guess, slash Interstellar. So
Mhm.
let me take it with his body of work first, to I guess lay down the groundwork, to then I guess understand for why everything they did with Tenet was classic Nolan. It was him showing his strengths, and like I said, the statement from the critical drinkers, what I agree with, the best and the worst of Nolan. I agree with the statement. I didn't agree with the arguments that the critical drinker was breaking down, because he's breaking down not so much aesthetically, but similar to the concepts you were making regarding character in this. So as a whole, his body of work, I'd say the last pure Christopher Nolan movie was The Prestige. That was the last one. After that, it became more blockbuster stuff, for why some people lament that he was no longer an independent filmmaker. He was more of the grandiose, big budget film guy. But he showed that he can still tell a well crafted story with a big budget. Hence, Inception is how some people see it. An original property that required that kind of budget to tell something that complex that you don't normally see. Now, with respects to what makes Nolan classic, there's a distinct sound, a distinct approach, a distinct restraint with cinematography that it sounds fantastic, but yet somehow it's stylistic. I've always found that interesting. It's not crazy camera tricks here and swooping whatever. No, but somehow his cinematographer that ends up the last movie they end up doing together, I think was his name is Wally something.
It starts with a P, doesn't it?
His
Wally.
last name with the P, but I think it's silent. Wally something, because he ended up becoming his own director. He did that movie with Johnny Depp, where Johnny Depp downloads his consciousness into some servers. The movie was a bust, but the thing is that he had a great eye. So I think the
Did
last
they
one.
do Dunkirk together?
No, I think the last one might have been The Dark Knight. If not The Dark Knight Rises. I could be wrong. But it's that Prestige being the last one of its kind. My issue that I've had, notwithstanding with the Batman movies, my issue with Nolan in general have been two principal things. One, his sound mixing, which is going to come into big play with all of his movies. But sound mixing, for why Interstellar was finally the one where, like, okay, fine, I accept it because of what he said. Two, emotional connections to characters. You can have characters do some growth. You could tell a story and I won't give a damn, because it's not interesting. The character's not interesting. So that's something that has happened with Nolan. I would point to Inception being that one. I was more interested in the concept of Inception. I was not invested with Leonardo DiCaprio's emotional arc, because I didn't feel the emotional arc. In fact, I felt he overacted a lot of it, but yet he was nominated because, of course, um, it took a long time. I would say 10 years for me to watch it again and start feeling something for Leonardo DiCaprio's Cobb. Before that, I just didn't care. And every side character that I absolutely enjoy, except Ellen Page Elliott, her dialogue was so heavy-handed and just like the worst line that she says that always irks me when I watch Inception is like, dude, this is you did it. Okay, that was too heavy-handed, Nolan. I don't know how you thought that was gonna sound great. It's when they go into the snow level in that dream state, and as soon as they appear, we see Leo with a looking through the scope of a sniper rifle.
Yeah.
And then she says, "What's down there? Whatever we want Fisher to see." No, I mean, what's down there for you? Who was supposed to infer that?
But he, and I'm going to throw this one to you. So, if there's one problem I have throughout what we'll call it the post-Nolan movies, I think I'll agree with you. We'll say The Prestige is the last pure movie of his. I feel like the Batman series carried over into some of his other works, and one of the problems I had with some of his movies was the dialogue. And the issue I had was there were a couple moments, like in both Inception and Interstellar, where I went, I think you could have gotten away with that dialogue in the Batman series in a comic book universe movie, and you're trying to import it into something that's a little more gritty and realistic. And he likes to have characters who kind of do these like do kind of these big dramatic. I call more like comic book kind of dialogue
Like,
of how you get across big thematic points. And in his better movies, I just sort of ignore it. Like they're there, but I would never point to them as a criticism. I go, yeah, they're there, but it didn't bother me. But it's kind of all throughout his movies. Actually, I did a little bit better job in Tenet than he had before. But I don't know. Did you notice that? Because it was a problem with me at points in both Inception and Interstellar, where I was like, okay, well, you're really putting some heavy-handed dialogue in the characters. Like, you really want that moment. I feel like he's going for like this is the Academy Award moment, and he's gonna have characters give some great philosophical thing, and I find he doesn't pull off those.
That would be Inception.
Moments kind of well.
I do not have any issues, for the most part, with Interstellar. That one is what I consider the pinnacle of what he achieved, because I said the issue that I had with him was sound mixing, and second was this connection to characters. And I guess along with that, I don't know if I will put it up there with sound mixing, because it kind of plays to that point that you made regarding dialogue. That's actually been his issue since Memento, where I felt that he wants a distinct way to be said, so strict. Because when you I don't know if it was in the making or the film commentary, and it's the scene of the opening scene, or with spoilers from here on out for those that are watching.
Yeah,
okay, so
probably should have said that.
Pure spoilers. You've been warned, man. It's been 19 years since Memento, so here we go.
If you haven't seen it at this point, then there's nothing wrong.
So when Leonard kills Teddy, there's a moment where Joe, what's his face, the actor,
I can never say his name right. Pantoliano.
He's trying, Leonard, and he's like, and he's trying to bring some sense to Leonard before the inevitable, and he says, "You freak." That line, "you freak," if I remember correctly from the commentary of the film, that's Nolan. He said that Joe never got it
clue,
right.
Do you freak? Yes.
When he says "you freak," that he said that Joe could never get it right, so he actually dubbed it over for himself. So if he did that, it tells me that he's always had this issue in a way with dialogue, which goes into the sound mixing too, because my issue with this dialogue, you reference heavy-handedness. I reference heavy-handedness too, but not to the extent that probably it bothers you. That it doesn't bother me as much. Just that one really, really heavy-handed one in Inception that just Ellen Page delivers. What was, sorry, man, that thing always like I always get that way. Almost all her dialogue annoys me, but in the case of all of his films as a whole, you could not understand a lick of what some of these characters are saying, where it's like, especially when they have British accents. So that was my issue. The first time I watched The Prestige, I walked away from that confused, not by what I just saw on screen, but because I didn't understand a thing they were exchanging. Like, what the hell are you guys saying? That's why when I watched it again, I watched it at home and I used subtitles, and oh, dude, this is good. So I started to learn that I'm going to need subtitles for Nolan movies, because I had the same problem with Batman Begins. I'm like, dude, what is Michael Caine saying? Yeah, Christian Bale mumbles a lot, but Michael Caine is saying things that I do not understand a word of. Especially the one that always got me is like, what the flip is he saying? And because I watched that 4 times in the theaters, and I still didn't get it until I got the DVD and put it with subtitles on it. It's the part where Bruce tells Alfred, it was Rachel, Alfred. She was dying. She's downstairs sedated. I need you to take her home. And my Alfred is taking her to the car, and there's some waiters that kind of like,
oh yeah,
what's
they're
going
outside.
on? He's like, and people in the theater started laughing. I'm like, what the hell are you guys laughing at? What do you say? Subtitles. A little was for wear, I'm afraid. Who was supposed to deduce that? That's an issue I have with Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell from the BBC. A lot of the dialogue is so snappy and fast, and you have to be all on your up and up on all those accents and dialogues with those British people to understand a lick of what they're saying. But because I read the novel, I understood. So anyway, back to this thing. That was my issue, that when you have British characters delivering dialogue, don't understand a thing. So that was the thing that I learned that I noticed that I had issues with Nolan. That's like, dude, you have problems with dialogue / sound mixing here. There's a thing, you wanted to sound some way, and then you have dialogue that it's either too muted or the whispers are so high that it just like you can't
And he
discern what they're
clearly
saying.
wants it. I mean, like as you said, he said, "Oh no, this is intentional." Because to bring it back to Tenet, so I forgot to say this. So I had a problem with it. I'd say the first, 20 to 30 minutes of Tenet, maybe in fact maybe that was the problem with my getting into it. First 20, 30 minutes of Tenet, I was very aware of how much dialogue I was missing in the movie.
I didn't miss the dialogue, but I think it was because of the sound settings in my theater, the way it was set up. But if you listen to it as it's meant to be listened to, which I would say would be like Dunkirk style, where everything like on you, you're like, all right, dude, the sound's on me. I get it. I totally understand everybody missing the point, like the pitch meeting video. It's like, oh, here, let me play the dialogue, and the music's playing loud. It's like, what are you saying? What are you saying? And there, you turn off the music, and there's like, dude, you just explained the whole damn thing over music, and I didn't hear a damn thing. Yeah, that's the problem. Because in Interstellar, which is why I'm bringing it to there, is where I learned to accept it. Matthew McConaughey is mumbling almost all the time. I don't understand a thing of what he says, and you have the music playing so loud. There's no auto ducking anywhere. It's like so loud. Like, dude, what is he saying? And Nolan said that was intentional. So it took Interstellar for me to say, okay, I'll accept that this is the way you do it. So you need to work with me here. You have to include subtitles in your movies from now on. You have to. So I watched Dunkirk, and I'm glad he said, oh, this was meant to be a silent movie. Good, because if I like a silent movie, I didn't understand a lick of dialogue.
I think that is I'm going to go ahead and say I think that is a failing then, because if it's the director's intent to do something, it could be a failing on the viewer that you just don't want to accept something. But I find there's movies that it's very clear that the dialogue is drowned out for a reason, and if you're astute at all, you can usually pick up on it. You go, okay, the point of the scene is not what they're saying. It's about, the camera work. Something tells you that that's not the point of the scene. If you're curious, you can put on subtitles. But like Terrence Malick loves to do that. The characters are talking. You can just kind of pick out what they're saying. But it's also very clear that it doesn't quite matter that you're catching every line of dialogue. You get the gist, and you're just supposed to be getting the gist. With the Nolan movies, I go, this seems pretty important what they're saying. I just don't understand why you're drowning it out, because to not get it doesn't add to the mystery. You're usually very much, you want people tracking with these kind of things that you've set up very carefully, how he does his act structure. So I don't get why he does it. It seems to be antithetical to what he wants you to get by the end of the movie. So I don't really understand why he does it, even though I've heard his explanation.
Yeah, and like I said, yeah, I agree. That is Nolan's fault. One that I learned to accept, for which is why since Interstellar, I've been saying he needs his movies with subtitles. There's no excuse for it. And now we see Tenet, and that's the largest criticism towards him. And say, yeah, I agree. That thing needs subtitles.
Did you understand? Like, I thought maybe it was the intent. So the opening, they're going through. They have the masks on and stuff. Like, are we spoiler free for now? Or are we good to talk?
We already gave the warning. So yeah.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so they're going through. They got the masks on. I thought maybe that was the point. I was like, okay, maybe it doesn't matter that I'm not understanding it. But I had to say it was annoying, because boy, like, you're getting right in this movie, and I'll be lucky if I got half of what was said. Maybe it was the theater I was in. I'll be lucky if I got half of what was said in that opening. They're running through the building, and then it continued. There's the scene where like the guy's pointing the gun at him and threatening to kill him and stuff like that. The protagonist couldn't understand dialogue there. It was a problem for a while, but it seems like it got better throughout the movie. I think that's been commented on too. All of a sudden I noticed, like, oh, it's clear now. That was a huge barrier. In fact, thinking back on it now, I think that was a huge barrier for me getting into the movie, because most of it's about establishing a pace in the movie, and 30 minutes into the movie I didn't feel like I was into it yet. And I think part of it was I kept realizing I was focusing on, I think I missed that scene. I missed what they were saying there, and it was very difficult for me to get into the rhythm of it. So I didn't feel like I was in the rhythm of that movie until well over the hour mark, where I felt like I was, okay, I'm like with it again. So
yeah. Some people would probably not be remiss if they missed the beginning, the opening scene. That one, I caught just about everything they were saying. I just didn't understand the explanation of it until much later. But which is the point? Like, okay, what was the point? And we find out later what the point was. The only thing that I wasn't catching was code check. But what I did get was that they were speaking in code. So that was one thing that they were immediately speaking in codes. Like, we live in a twilight world. It's like, we live in a twilight world, and there are no friends at dusk. So you've been made. I'm here to either kill you or you come with me. So that was it. That's literally all the dialogue there. And it's like, we're giving the code. It's like, all right. So then thereafter, for Tenet, I guess bringing it all to this one, that's where my issue with Nolan continued, because I caught everything, but I admitted that it was hard to catch it. But it's like, the issue with Inception, almost 3/4 of the movie is exposition. That's basically all Joseph Gordon-Levitt's there for, to carry you, to explain everything.
Yeah.
And Ellen Page is there to ask the questions for you. But yeah, what does it mean? But what does that mean? Blah, blah, blah. And for you to get insight into Leo's character, she's asking his questions to basically flesh out his character. That's my issue, see? Everybody says that they, like, oh, the characters in Inception. What characters? There was no freaking character growth if it wasn't for Ellen Page asking him. It was just him trying to get home. That's it. And even then, I'm sorry, I didn't care. It's like, your emotional investment to the issues with your wife and whatever, I'm not buying it. As great as an actress you are, you couldn't save that connection.
And I like that actress. I'm going to forget her name too, but she's done other things. She's a very good actress when she wants to be. Her death scene in The Dark Knight Rises notwithstanding. But no, I think I might have viewed it more favorably from you, but I still don't think the strength of Inception was the Leo wife relationship. But at least he put it into a couple scenes where he gave it time. I don't know if it quite worked. It wasn't amazing for me, but at least he gave it some time.
He gave us a necessary backstory.
Yeah.
But there in goes my point, that the emotional connection, as number 2 that I had issue with, that he lacked the emotional connection. That was it. And to me, Inception was the prime example up to that point. It's like, there's no emotional investment here, despite his greatest efforts. Like, that's why I said the Dark Knight story notwithstanding, because that one you connect with Bruce Wayne throughout his entire growth, trying to become Batman the hero, not some masked guy that's just nuts. So you needed his growth. That's what those movies were about. It was the Batman. Okay. So with that out of the way, it was like I felt like if he had an original property, he had that struggle with the emotional connections. I did get the emotional connections in Memento, absolutely. That's because it was a tour de force of acting from all their fronts, and it's, my goodness, that's just awesome overall. But then Insomnia, I was kind of there, kind of not, even though it's a great story. Watch it again now. It's like, you just let yourself go. And it's like, this is so good. But I'm not entirely invested in the emotional characters, particularly Al Pacino's character, as it should be. Mostly because I'm distracted by Robin Williams every time. It's like, dude, you are creepy. Oh man, you're creepy.
He had that kind of a Heath Ledger effect there, where he overshadowed the main character a little bit, where you're so drawn to his character that it imbalances the movie a little bit, because you're too interested in trying to get back to the Robin Williams, but he operates best as only being a fraction of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because in that movie, where I would have bought into a little more had it been fleshed out just a little bit more. Al Pacino accidentally shooting his partner, and the partner believes that, did you shoot me on purpose? No, it was an accident. The fog. You can easily conclude it was an accident, but Al, at some point, I don't know where we're supposed to infer that, that the Ace case, I think would be okay now that my friend is gone. So he's not really having an issue with the death of his friend, but we're supposed to infer it later when Maura Tierney's character comes into play. He's like, I don't know if I really felt all that bad that I accidentally shot my friend, because his death actually benefits me, because I actually I planted evidence on the guilty guy. We don't get that until much later. So I mean, he lacked it. The Prestige, I felt more so than anybody else, Christian Bale's connection to his family crisis. Absolutely. Yes. I didn't feel it with Hugh Jackman. I didn't feel his obsession and passion for striving to get the biggest magic trick. If anything, I felt like he was trying to make a comeback from being wronged so much and being doubted. So I never felt like he was ever the ultimate antagonist. Look what you've done. It's like, wait, dude, you really gone all far-fetched. I didn't really feel, where did that crescendo happen in your character growth for you to become that extreme that you're willing to destroy a man's life and steal his child? I never get the conclusion, despite the fact it's still an awesome story. I love the movie. But if we're going to really nitpick, because we're nitpicking Tenet, we got to nitpick all of it. Inception, I spoke about it to death. Dunkirk, that one is a different story because it's not about a character here or there. That's what Nolan was saying. This is not about an individual. This was a true story of what actually happened and the people that fought to make them all survive together in this position of impossibility. So we just happen to have some eyes on the ground or eyes on the boats or eyes in the sky to get a feel for what all this really entailed in the impossible situation that the troops found themselves with their backs against the waters and the enemy closing in, killing everything in its sight. So there's an emotional payoff to that because you know that civilians came to the rescue, and the soldiers feeling like, man, we're coming home defeated. It's like, no, we're glad you're home. And for someone that's any history buff would know, it's like, dude, and the next time they come back, like 2 years later, it's with a 1 million man armada led by the Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower with the D-Day invasion. So yeah, there's a lot there historically, and that's why the movie itself, despite the fact that the biggest issue besides the sound mixing was the atrocious soundtrack, the emotional payoff always hits home. It's incredibly well done. So high props to a masterclass in storytelling where it was an audio and visual experience, not a dialogue experience, on purpose. And that's how he explained it. So like, okay, I'll excuse that. I still don't excuse the awful soundtrack, but it nailed it.
The intent of the movie is obviously a major component of it. If you're watching a movie for what you think the director, wants to do because what they've previously done, and you're not watching the movie that they're trying to present to you, then obviously you're not going to enjoy it. If we're going to critique, so I love The Prestige. It's pretty high up on my list for his. But I'll admit that the interplay between the characters and their family is uneven, and I'm not sure if it's uneven just because Christian Bale is such a good actor. The relationship with him and his wife, not him and Scarlett Johansson, him and his wife in that movie, the one who eventually commits suicide. That part of the movie is so strong for me that it overshadows some of the other relationships a little bit. I'll maybe cut a little bit of slack to the Hugh Jackman character because part of his arc is that his motivations are confused, because it purposely starts out that his motivation is that he blames Christian Bale for killing his wife, and that you realize halfway through the movie he's become confused. I think the Scarlett Johansson character, while they're still together, says something to him. So, what? I don't care about my wife. It's about and that that you're not really sure anymore. Well, what is your motive? Like, where are you? And that he's kind of gotten lost. So I might excuse that one a little bit. I didn't quite buy the Scarlett Johansson, Christian Bale one, or certainly not as much as the other ones.
No, because that's on purpose. Remember, it's two people.
Yes.
So that's the only reason I can excuse it, because the one that loved the wife didn't want the affair, but the one that wanted the affair did not love the wife. And it's like, say it, I love you. It's like, you don't mean it today. It's like, some days you do, some days you don't. Some days you're more in love with magic than you are with me, and it just makes it all the better when I can tell which is which. That's the magic of it, because you can understand that the hints are there. That something is split about Christian Bale's character. Like, Borden doesn't really seem like a whole person if he has some mental issues. Only to find out, like, holy smokes, you've been two people this whole time. Like, the simplest explanation was there the whole time. It's like, no, the man, it's too simple. It's the same man that comes out of the box. The Prestige is the same man.
It got me the first time I saw it, and you literally have the Hugh Jackman character, telling the answer. No, it can't be that simple. And you're like, that's who I was watching the movie. No, that can't be it. It's too simple.
That's why it made it all the more powerful when that's like, well, if it's the same guy, why is he still missing fingers? You're that devoted to the craft. dude, you're insane. Because the him was like, I don't understand why I'm still bleeding like this so much. Like,
But there was a difference between the two characters, and it's odd because you see it at the end when he kills Hugh Jackman. In some ways, I feel like even though the Hugh Jackman character kind of becomes the villain at the end of the movie, I feel like he actually understood the magic better than the Christian Bale character. For him, it was almost like a personal, like an art. It was so about that the craft, and that he didn't really care so much about the audience. It was about his personal reasons for almost like a samurai character about or like Robert De Niro in Heat.
Yeah,
I'm going to stick to the code, and it's about the ethics of sticking to that. Whereas the Hugh Jackman character said, "You never got it, did you?" It was about, he says something like that if you could fool him for 1 second, he said, you got to see something special, and you realize that was the difference between the two. That the Christian Bale character never got, and he never got that enjoyment from his performance.
That's true, and that's. Man, I gotta watch that movie again. The wife's been on a Nolan binge. Like, we gotta watch Tenet. Like, sure, we just watched it, but let's watch it again. That's fine. I'm cool. We just got it in 4K. This is actually our third time through it, so it's
Oh wow.
Yeah, she enjoyed the movie, but she also is of that audience that didn't grasp that. And this last time we're watching it, we're actually about a third of the way through, no, halfway through it, because we're stopping along the way, which is what I'll get to in a bit, because I gotta touch on Interstellar to jump on to Tenet. So Interstellar was the film that he addressed one of the two main issues that I mentioned, the sound mixing. He told me, accept it, that's the way it is. Okay, fine, I'll accept it. But had you screwed up that emotional connection, that you missed out on everything, got it. Thank you, Google. It would have failed entirely. If Matthew McConaughey's love for his daughter did not translate there, the entire movie falls apart.
I agree. Absolutely.
Because that's the driving force of the film. That's why there's 3 moments that I, as a father, just find myself crying. I think the two most powerful parts that are overshadowed by the even larger part is when he's leaving his daughter, and oh my goodness,
the video scene.
No, that's the
messages.
The messages scene is the best. The other one is him finally seeing his daughter. She's that old. There's something beautiful in that moment. But yes, the moment where he's catching up on the memories and he's just crying, like, dude, that is some honest emotional expression there, man. It's like, dude, I buy this entirely. And then ultimately, when his daughter finally comes on, and you're still like, oh my goodness, yeah, she's on. And she's like calling him out, you're not here. Like, you're feeling it. It's like, this is absolutely gorgeous. That's, for me, that's why I ranked it at Nolan's. I did this with my friend Russell. We ranked them. I put in, basically our lists mirror each other before Tenet. And then his number one is Inception. I said, knock your entire list down one rug and put Interstellar over the top. And I said the difference between him and I said the difference between you and I in this case is that I, as a father, connect even more emotionally to it because it's a father-daughter story. So you kind of need that kind of background to truly connect. And since he's still on the younger side, not being married or at all having an emotional connection of that sort, he doesn't rank it that way, and that's okay. I said, dude, that's fine, because I have a deeper connection because I'm a father. So, taking it to Tenet, it has the high concept of Inception with the principles of theoretical physics and quantum mechanics of Interstellar, with the sound mixing of both. You have the loud involved music of Inception and the complex exposition from Interstellar drowned out by the sound. So that's where Tenet falls short, because you have individuals, not to knock on anybody, I as someone that grew up as English as the second language that became my first language eventually, can attest to, when you have individuals with heavy accents that probably have English as their second language delivering complicated things, it's not driving home the point. It's like, okay, I'm a little lost here. So the Priya character, I understand her a lot more because of my second viewing. But for the first viewing, it's like, what the hell is she saying, and what is her involvement in this movie? And that's what she was the one that was kind of like pushing the protagonist in one which way or another. But here's where I defend Tenet. The pitch meeting video is the one that stood out to me because every time they cut back and forth, because he has a green screen, it was a different background. Did you see the pitch meeting one?
I haven't.
I have. You haven't? Okay, so you're gonna get it when you see it.
It's on my watch. I will definitely go watch it.
But you'll see it when you get it, because the two characters, the writer, the pitch meeting, the writer and the executive are back and forth, and the executive's like, "Why do you keep changing backgrounds every time we're having a conversation?" "Oh, because we're gonna have a conversation, and we're gonna stop and change locations and continue the conversation there." So individuals are gonna have a conversation and stop completely and pick that conversation up in a completely other place. So they're gonna stop for like a few hours and then carry on a conversation. "Oh yes, sir." It's like, wouldn't that be confusing? It's like, "Oh yeah, but it's gonna look beautiful." Here's where, if anyone's just watching it for that way, then they missed it entirely, because the answer is actually at the conclusion of the movie. The conclusion of the movie. This is kind of where I felt that the cinematography was a little off, because Nolan doesn't generally do this. There's 3 moments where the cinematography was wanting our focus on something. The only time I ever seen Nolan force us to look at something was when Leonardo DiCaprio, he got through the customs checkpoint, is able to arrive home. Am I dreaming or am I not? Spinning the totem, sees his kids, he's distracted, so now the camera wants you to focus on the totem. That's the only time that I can think of in all of his movies that he made us focus on something. Not so in Tenet. He was already kind of giving it to us, which kind of annoyed me. Opening scene.
Yeah.
The reverse bullet that saves John David at the very beginning, and he looks and you see some guy running away. But then the camera, for some reason, wants us to be fixated on some jangling little emblem or a thing on the backpack. Like, pay attention, it's gonna come back later. I'm like, okay. Unless it's like a plot point, it had no reason for us to have our focus on it a little more. It's like, remember that. That's the only thing that drew me away, because he immediately got me like, dude, you already want me to pay attention to that. I don't like that.
And I already forgot it too by the end. That was one of those things I had to figure out, like, talking to people later on. Like, did you catch this? And, between like 4 of us, we pieced the movie together.
So, in the end, we realized that the Neo character that he ends up meeting this whole time is the one that puts on the backpack and turns around and you see the little thing. Like, okay, that's the 3rd appearance. The 2nd appearance of it is when they're trying to stop the bomb from going off, or the algorithm from going off, and when they get there, the door is locked. They can't unlock it, and Vanko, the henchman of the bad guy, is there basically to stall them. And before he could shoot John David, now that we know, Neil's character jumps in between, gets shot. He's the one that dies, but apparently he's also the one that opens the gate for them to unlock it. But before all that, when they get to that gate, there's a body already there that's already been shot, and you see the backpack, and it's that. I guess that little rabbit's foot that you're supposed to follow from the very beginning of the film.
Yes.
There's a 2nd appearance. Okay, this was that one guy that saved me at the very beginning. So that's the connection there. So, like, I don't want from the very first scene for us to make that a central focus, something that's going to come back later. Like, we're going to forget it. But I understand the movie was complex. Maybe that's how you could have lost it. So then when Neil...
It got a little too cute. I don't know if that's the right phrase. A little too cute for me. Like, see what I can do for placing... because since that became like a totemistic thing of his movies, or at least what people expect from his movies, I feel like he feels he has to do it now, and then he has to top whatever he's done previously. He's kind of left himself where there's really nowhere else to go except for to become so convoluted to say, look what I can do over 3 hours, and can you follow this rabbit trail? And that's I don't like the direction where he's going overall when you start kind of tracing it back over the movies. I'm like, I think you need to get back to what you did really well, and why people were attracted to you initially, and why they wanted you to do the Batman series was you did these kind of complex stories, but they were always in service of the character, and the little quirks were there for the story. They were not separate from the story. They were either integral to it, or it assisted it in some way. It wasn't well, here's a story, but here's a way I can jazz it up, and now it's interesting. Then you kind of go back and think about it. You go, what did that add, or was that? It was more, like I said, more interesting than necessary. And I feel like at least with Memento, through like The Prestige. We can kind of argue about the execution of it, but it was clearly his intention to keep it that way. And I felt like he started to lose that once he did in Inception, and the idea became about what's he going to come up with next. And he started thinking more. He started planning his movies more conceptually. Whereas before, it felt like it was more grounded in the characters themselves, and things kind of grew out of that. Or at least that's how I kind of see his arc in movie making.
Well, the two of the points that I guess what I was mentioning in Tenet about like the camera focus, it's one of my favorite scenes, but I felt like the Nolan was giving it away before it even happened. And that was the heist, the freeway heist scene. So when they're getting away, when they got the box of this piece of the algorithm, the camera is kind of moves forward but to the side a bit, so you can catch a glimpse of a shattered part of the passenger side glass. So I'm like, you want us to notice it, or in repeated viewing we could have caught it. But that was already saying, like, wait, that wasn't there before. That's going to come into play. Pay attention. And yeah, because the next thing's like, what the hell is that? And it's the car coming in reverse. So like, huh. That was fantastic, by the way. So well done. So that's what I mean. Like, I felt like this. It was a different cinematographer, I could tell. That's not normally what Nolan does. So that felt a little off of Nolan. Everything else was typical Nolan. It was his high concept of his love of science and science fiction, the theoretical possibilities and all that. So when people like in the pitch meetings, like, why do these characters keep having this back and forth in the different places? Well, the answer, like I said, is at the end of the film, where Neil is leaving, and when he turns around, the backpack shows that little token, like, oh, you're the one that died to help us unlock the gate to get out. To like, what's going on here? So the giveaway that Neil was saying was this is the beginning of our friendship. This is where we start. We're going to go on a lot of adventures together, and in repeated viewings you'll start catching it. It's when they first meet and they sit down, and he's like, I hear you in need of this and that, and John David says, yeah, I need this or whatever. So he's like, I'm Neil. So they shake hands, and then the waiter comes over. And I think he said, I'll have a martini or whatever and Diet Coke for John David. They just met. And he's like, you done your research. And that's where they left it. That's because they've known each other for so long, and he had to pretend that he didn't. The final sequence, Neil is there about 2 or 3 different times because he's normal time, inverted, and then normal after being inverted. But he's already dead, and then he's trying to get to the position to be able to open the gate or whatever to let him in before he dies, or he has died and stuff like that. Because when they have the discussion towards the very end, like, or this never happened, we don't see each other, take it apart, bury it, whatever, we'll come kill each other later, so we never know who or what might have happened. We find out that the protagonist is the one that funds Tenet. He's the one that recruits Neil. So when they discuss what is called the grandfather paradox in the movie. The grandfather paradox. Can you go in the past and kill your grandfather and still be around? Wouldn't that be contradictory of the nature of how time works? Because you're killing your past in a way. So how can you ever be? So like, we don't know. So with the Interstellar and Tenet both apply here, because it's the scene what people know as the library scene, or the Tesseract scene, the library of memories, as I come to call it for Interstellar. It's like he sees a little girl's room, all of her memories, all like her entire life, and he's like, she's not going to understand this complexity of everything you were trying to message to her. It's like, no, but she eventually will come back to this point, so I'm going to find that point and deliver the message. So he's communicating through time, but he's communicating in all these different layers. So it could have happened at any time. And he's like, but how do you know she's going to get it? She's going to come back for that watch eventually. So it doesn't matter if it's past, present, or future. She's going to see it. And we know it succeeded because we are here. We built this fifth dimension. We are they. We survived. Just that we're trying to find the point that continues the continuity of humanity. Same thing with Tenet. What happened? What continued that? How did they know that where things were? Because the bad guy started getting a notice on this. He's like, he started getting a hint of stuff. That's why he kind of throws it back in one line. It's so easy to miss because he doesn't do the thing and says Tenet. But the bad guy does say, yes, but we live in a twilight world. And John David doesn't respond to that. He's like, oh, what is that? Whitman? It's pretty. Like, I'm on to you, is what the guy was saying. I'm on to you. Because you make no sense. How do you know so much when your background makes no sense? That's why there was a line that everybody missed because they said it on the boat when they were like speed sailing, whatever the heck that was. Where he's like, you don't need a partner. That's what the bad guy Sator tells him. And it's like, you have no background in anything that we're doing. Yeah, I'm that good. It's in other words saying, you don't need to worry about anybody finding out about me. It's like, that's true, because the bad guy couldn't figure anything out about this guy. He's like, you're that good at covering your tracks. Okay, then maybe we can talk. That's basically how he got his confidence, because like, this guy doesn't make any sense. You're supposed to be some kind of diplomat, but you're a pretty good fighter for a diplomat and stuff like that. He just kept questioning, but like, this guy is shrouded in mystery. He's pretty good. Anyway, so the final moment, the entire battle sequence that's layered in complexity, you could say is a convoluted theorem of different timelines, is because it's like, how many times did we do this? Because before they go in there, it's like, all right, the red team is going to go in normal. The blue team is inverted. You can't see them. We're not going to see anything that they do. They've already done it. We have the benefit of their experience to go into doing what we're about to do. In other words, they've already done it. So we're going to go through the motions of what we know that they went through to figure this thing out. But Neil's character breaks the rule they all had. Do not mix one another. The reason he mixed it is because his information shows that they failed the mission. So he needed to break the rule and interact with real time. And when that didn't work, is to further risk everything to make sure that this timeline will succeed, or else all fails. So that's why when they say, why are these characters talking in different places? And this is my conclusion without doing any research. I'm not going to go into the forums to figure this out. This is my conclusions, and normally whatever I deride of Nolan stuff tends to be right. So I'm going to go off my confidence in that. Is that this mission has happened that many times. So when this little token that the camera wants us to focus on about Neil's backpack, and Neil telling us at the very end that you, protagonist, you started Tenet and you recruited me. This is the moment where we meet. But this is where we have our adventures, and you're going to recruit me in the future. So somewhere on the future, John David the protagonist realizing this important mission, he needed to put the things in place. He's like, okay, in this part-time, so now think of Matthew McConaughey in the Library of Memories. Which positions in time do so-and-so or these pieces need to be in order to make sure that we succeed this time in saving humanity? That's why it looks the way it is. It's a complex thing because it is complex when you're dealing with quantum mechanics and theoretical physics. So that would say, oh yeah, high concept failed. Not for someone that actually enjoys this stuff. It's like, dude, this thing has found its face absolutely. That's why I said my only review of it was pure physics brilliance, because that's exactly what it was. Everything was a play on physics. How do you show someone fighting in our real entropy, fighting against somebody that has reverse entropy? He displayed it. Awesome. How do you affect or have characters deal with time, like the moment where Neil and the protagonist enter a room looking for a painting, and they're like, what the hell happened here? It hasn't happened yet. And then someone comes out of the doors, well, on each side, not realizing it's the same guy, because the event has already happened. So we're seeing one play out in reverse and one play out in real time. It's like, what the hell? Which is why it's like, with the grasp of the physical properties of what Nolan was bringing across here, it's literally leapfrogging off Interstellar. So that kind of complexity, most of everybody's not going to get it. A lot of people didn't enjoy Interstellar. Interstellar has worse reviews than Tenet. Why? Because this is stupid. It's not possible. They're like, wait, you believe in science fiction crap, but you're gonna complain against Interstellar? You had astrophysicists come in and say that's as accurate as it gets to real theorem. Because theoretical physics is just that. In theory, this could happen, but obviously it hasn't happened. But everything that Nolan portrayed, besides the fact that these characters were in different planets, was scientifically based. That's why some people had their minds blown. It's like, you mean this could be possible? Yes, based on the theory of relativity, absolutely, this is what we expect. And the wormhole and the black hole, that's astrophysicists' recreation of the manipulation of gravity and light. That's as accurate as it gets, for which is why it was stunningly gorgeous. So that's all grounded in realism. Now taking that to, like, say, the spy genre, you get Tenet. If you want to have a fun time travel movie, Back to the Future, even though it's wrong. And then you have where you can have time travel that works, and then you're like, this movie is really stupid because now you can poke holes everywhere because Swiss cheese. Avengers Endgame. That movie, you can enjoy it on its face, and now I absolutely hate it because I watched it and I'm like, this makes absolutely no sense. Why did you have to do this stupid heist thing just so you could set up that Loki's back so he can have his own Disney Plus show? Literally, that's what happened. It's like everything is stupid. All you had to do was go back 7 months instead of 10 years or whatever it was to get the stones back. But instead, it's like, no, let's go back to different timelines and risk changing those realities so we can save our reality and then go back and put those stones in place to save that reality. See, the thing is, if you really, really, really want to think about how stupid that is, this is how it goes. Captain America takes everything back at the very end, but doesn't come back. He gets married, has a life. Didn't he just change the lives of everyone else that the original Peggy married? She married someone else and had kids. How do we know that? Because her niece kisses Captain America in Civil War. Whoopsie! So that's why Tenet, in its complexity, people say, that doesn't make sense. This is stupid, it's convoluted. It works because that he structured it in that way. If you want entertainment, you can poke fun. You could take the same complaints that people have about Tenet, but you can't poke holes at it because well, I don't get it, but that's why I don't like it. But it's like, I like it, but man, that's actually really stupid. Like, you start seeing what happened, why I say, if you're going to tackle a topic of time travel and you want to do it right, or time manipulation or time warping, you have to do it right. That's why Nolan said this is not a time travel movie, but it is a play on time itself. And this is my last point, for which I'll yield to you. When I saw the trailer for Tenet, because nobody knew what the heck this movie was about. When I saw the trailer for Tenet, the trailer was just this. It was a trailer of John David walking into a room where there were holes on the glass, and it's like, okay, what is that? And then Neil asks, what happened here? It hasn't happened yet. Okay, that was it basically. So what do we infer from that? For most people, nothing. So my friends and I discussed it. It's like, what do you think this movie's about? Oh, it's a movie that takes place simultaneously, past, present, and future. And we're going to be seeing the movie in the present. In other words, the consciousness of the protagonist will be traveling from the past and the future. That's the POV of the movie. That's what I immediately inferred from the trailer. Immediately. And that's exactly what the movie was. So I guess to say, I'm not a Nolan worshiper, but it is something to say that I studied the guy enough to understand where he's going, for which is why I called out The Dark Knight. I described the entire plot before it came out. The Dark Knight Rises, I called everything for what it was. Interstellar, same thing. Dunkirk, same thing. So when this one's like, same thing. So every single movie that's come out since Inception, I have called it all out. So I feel I have a pretty good gauge about Nolan. I have recorded, whether it's in writings on my blogs or previous podcasts, I have records to show and prove that, yes, I called this thing out. So it's not just me, like, in hindsight, see, I told you. No, I have said it before, for which is why this doesn't surprise me. And also the audience reaction doesn't surprise me, because the same reaction that people had to Tenet that they had to Interstellar. High concept, they didn't get it. But when you take the same principles and stupefy it for like Endgame, Avengers Endgame, or some other hot tub time machine or whatever, they'll accept it because it's entertaining. So this was high concept meant to entertain. Some people were too caught up on the high concept and wanted something different. I got exactly what I expected, a Nolan theorem, and I enjoyed it for what it was. Oh, you were going to interject somewhere earlier, so I thought I cut off the point.
I was, you're riding the wave there. I was making sure you were finished.
Yeah.
So I'll say what I'll say what my favorite thing about the movie was, because you touched on it. So the Robert Pattinson character, I thought that relationship worked really well because it did tip it off. At least for me, it tipped it off. I remember thinking this in the theater. I went, the two of you know each other, and it wasn't because of any gimmicky thing. It was because of how Robert Pattinson played it, and not just that scene with the Coke. He clearly played it like that he knew him. I was just like, because it's in the context of that movie. I was like, in another movie where you might have been like, why is this guy acting like they've been friends for years when they just? But I was like, okay, but the protagonist didn't play it that way. So I thought that worked really well. I said the two of them worked well because I was like, when it got to the end and you're like, okay, good, that played out the entire movie. Robert Pattinson played it like someone who could not help but avoid that he had known the guy for a long, long time and that they were friends, and played it that way. But John David's character, the protagonist, didn't play it that way necessarily. It took a kind of throughout the movie, and there were still points where he would come up and say things I don't know you well enough to necessarily trust you. That came up a couple of times. So how that played out in the timeline of the movie of how time works, that worked really well for me. In fact, that was the best part of the movie for me, was the two of them.
Mm-hmm. So we need a side movie of just them and their adventures.
Quite honestly, if the universe of that movie had been more about just the two of them, I think I might have had a slightly different impression coming out of it. When it went back to Kenneth Branagh and the wife, I just I can see how everything tied together and all that. It just I lost a little bit of interest anytime it kind of segued to her and him. First, it just that it didn't play out quite right for me. The protagonist and her, some of that didn't quite work for me, even though I see the essential kind of aspect of how it works when you're looking back at the timeline of, okay, once you get to the very end and things make sense. Mm-hmm. The problem is that even when things kind of made sense, I went, okay, I get it now, or it makes sense. It still just doesn't quite work for me. I suppose it's kind of like a lot of things with some of other Nolan's movies, where certain aspects of it are simply more interesting than the others. And for me, the Robert Pattinson, John David, or the protagonist, that worked so well for me that anytime it segued away from that, I was less interested in the in the movie. I realized. So, like I said, because it took a while to get the two of them to kind of pair up. So there was like the beginning with I couldn't understand the dialogue, and I was like doing mental gymnastics sitting there in the theater, going, "Am I tracking this correctly?" So, and that's another point. I will have to see how I feel about it on a second viewing, because I also realized that in the first 30 minutes that I was also missing stuff on top of it. Once you realize you've missed something, and then you're thinking about, did you get something? Then you're not fully in the scene that you're watching, either. So, like I said, I felt like it was like 45 minutes into the movie really before I felt like, okay, I'm in the movie now. So I am interested to see if I feel any different going back and just being able to just kind of watch it and not be so detached and be thinking so heavily during each of the scenes. But yeah, I guess just between, like I said, it's a weird feeling. So when I got done with the movie, I felt like I feel like you and I have different opinions of the movie. But if I'm being honest too, I was both like really excited and disappointed by it, and it's a weird thing. Like I was disappointed for some of the reasons I talked about. Yet my genuine reaction when I was done with it was I was like super excited, and there were a couple of us that were talking like, "Oh, do you think this? Do you think that?" And we were like going back and forth. So it was kind of a confusing movie for me in that I realized that I didn't quite enjoy it as much as some others, and that there were, like I said, the dialogue, some of the side stories, and yet at the same time, I never got bored with it. I never felt like it was just a gimmick. I was clearly interested in figuring it out. And not every movie, just because it has an interesting premise, keeps you interested. If something else isn't there, you'll lose interest in halfway through it and go, yeah, I don't know, I lost interest in it and I didn't care how the plot points connected at the end. So clearly that was in place, and it was there. So yeah, it reminded me of Interstellar. I have slightly the same opinion of Interstellar. I had the same problems with Interstellar. I have trouble with like the first half an hour of the movie where they're, or is it longer, where they're on Earth before they kind of get to outer space. I had problems with that. I had problems with some of the dialogue. I kind of felt Nolan was like reaching a little hard to go for this is our generation's 2001: A Space Odyssey. A little bit like, yeah. See, that's the thing. You have to judge a film by what it says. And, in some ways, Nolan invites criticism because he makes his movies very clear to you. This is I'm swinging for the fence. It's like when Interstellar came out and you watch it, it's like we've seen Apocalypse Now. The filmmaker saying, I'm going for a home run. This is meant to be the epic movie, and therefore you have to kind of judge the movie by that. You can't just kind of go, oh yeah, that was like super interesting, I really liked it, because the filmmaker wants you to say, oh no, this is meant to be an all-time great, epic, and huge, big accent kind of marks with it. I still haven't seen Interstellar again, oddly enough. I meant to. That was another one I meant to watch again because I just went, I wonder if I'll feel differently if I watch it a second time. Because I had the same feeling as Tenet, where I went, the things I liked about the movie, I liked so much that it makes the things that I didn't like disappointing. Instead of being able to kind of go, oh, maybe there are a few things I didn't quite like, but it didn't bother me, that there's like this stark contrast between the two, and it irritates you. And I finally realized it when I was watching Interstellar. I was like, I think I'm irritated that I liked the movie and I didn't love it. Like, it was one of those, I got to the end, I went, why don't I love this movie? This is the kind of movie this should be in my top 20 of like all time. And it was kind of confusing, like, so why don't I like it that much? And Tenet was kind of the same thing. It was the type of movie that I know that I tend to like those movies, and it's Christopher Nolan. And I got done, I went, but I don't like it that much. Why don't I like it that much? And there's a disappointment when you feel like you thought it was going to be here, and it's here, and here is still pretty good, even though my criticism, like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed it despite my criticisms. But I think there's some disappointment that it wasn't up here for me. I suppose that's it. So I will watch it again because, like I said, one of the biggest problems was the fact establishing the rhythm, and I guess I'm about to get to where you are with him in the dialogue. It annoys the heck out of me because I see absolutely no reason for him doing it. It doesn't help what he's trying to do by masking the dialogue. If it was a scene where the imagery or the cinematography was telling the story, and you're like, well, of course I'm masking it because I want you to be focusing on the image, but the dialogue in his movies is always extremely important to being able to connect all the plot points. So I just go, but he has weird eccentricities like that. Like when he re-released 2001: A Space Odyssey, and he refused to restore it, and like he said, no, the only way to watch 2001 is to have the same pure experience that I had when I watched it. And then he released this kind of unrestored print when it went out, and it had like marks and cuts on it, and everyone else just went like, I appreciate your love of analog filmmaking and not digital and stuff like that, but do you really think Stanley Kubrick would want everyone to see his film in this condition and not be fully restored and remastered, and that he wouldn't, a guy who was a technological innovator wouldn't want like a new 4K scan of his film? So he has his own kind of strange, I feel like, views on filmmaking, and he's kind of stubborn. Like a lot of kind of artists, he's stubborn, and I feel like the sound thing is something that he's gotten stubborn about, and it's about that people don't understand what I'm doing, and that I'm almost afraid that he's going to try to make a point with his future films to make sure that you really noticed it. That, oh no, I didn't get rid of it despite your criticisms. It's going to be there.
Now, if we didn't have the current situation we find ourselves in, I think this would have been the tipping point where the audience would have been like, yo, either put subtitles or you got to get better at your sound mixing here. But because now maybe we don't have theaters anymore, we don't know. With at-home viewing, you could turn on the subtitles, you control your own sound, so we don't get the Nolan experience. We get to control the experience in a way. Then he might remain stubborn. So that's one thing that I wanted to say, that this could have been that point where, like, dude, now you got to address this. We're like, I don't think he's gonna be able to address this because we're not giving him a chance to. If anything, he came out against HBO Max.
And honestly, watching his films, I just realized this since I'm talking about rewatching it. Rewatching his film now is not going to be the same experience because talk about other Nolan, specific things. He's huge on the shifting aspect ratio thing. So I realized it's going to be different than when I watched it in the theater. Because one of the things I read about Tenet is that when you're watching at home, is that the aspect ratio shifts quite a bit. In fact, that was another criticism some people had when it got released. They went, compared to other movies, it shifts a lot during some of the scenes in the movie where there's a lot of back and forth. And sometimes it's annoyed me, sometimes it doesn't. With say like the Dark Knight and other things, the IMAX sequences are usually spaced out far enough that you kind of go, oh, okay, this is an IMAX sequence, and it goes back to the widescreen format. But going back and forth, I find that to be distracting, and that's another thing that he's really stuck on. That he likes to have that. So I'm going to see how I feel about that, because I read a couple reviews already that said there's some scenes where it flips back and forth to the point that it was distracting to some people watching it at home.
In Tenet?
Yes.
Probably if they saw that version. I got the 4K. So far, I haven't noticed it on that one. It actually fills out the entire screen, which I found pretty cool. And before that, widescreen is just that. It's just widescreen. So, to actually touch on one of the strengths that's heavily overlooked, and this is to the credit of John David's acting. This was a very physical role. When you see it again, it was a very physical role. And John David was a football player. I didn't know that. So it's like this dude had a physical, athletic background. I'm like, dude, no wonder you pulled off what you pulled off, because that restaurant fight scene, as brief as it is just outstanding. It's well choreographed, and the dude really looks like he's beating up on these guys.
Yes.
Holy smokes, man. And it's believable the dude can hold his own. So like, I like that. Oh, the protagonist is a one-note character. No, he's not. He actually has two points where he compromises on his mission. And it's one point where he compromises on the mission, and the other one where he comes to realize that, holy smokes, my friend's gonna die for me. This guy's been my friend longer than usual. That's the second one. The first one was where he puts himself in position to risk the entire mission to save the woman that he used as a means to get to the bad guy. She's just another stepping stone to get to the bad guy. He lied to her, used her, and he's like, look, your thing is your thing. Here's a gun to protect yourself. Just don't use it on anyone. That's basically what he ends up doing. But she was really never his consequence, because they're all going to die. She is not greater than all of humanity. Until the bad guy shoots her with an inverse bullet and realizes, crap, she's going to die. And now this is on me. That's when he's like, all right, we don't have time for this. Like, screw it, I'm going to do it. What are you doing? I'm going to go back in time. Like, just go back. So that's where you could say he has a crisis of conscience, where he's putting at risk the entire mission. For which is why I believe that affected Neil's position. Because Neil will ultimately have to die because of the choice that John David made in that position. So that's me inferring all that from just two viewings. The first one was in the theater, and the second one was at home. And I immediately took it because it wasn't that hard to deduce. Like, that could be. I'm not saying it is, but it definitely could be. So that's what I mean. His movies do tend to take more than one sitting. That is not Batman movies. But it's the criticisms I think will subside if people actually give it its due and if they were able to understand the film, like with subtitles. But a part of me did feel that it might have been sabotage to discourage people from going to the theater because the no one should be getting out of their house. And Warner Brothers might have been in that favor because they didn't want to release it in the theater. They wanted to put it on HBO Max. And Nolan said, no. This is going to go to the theater, which is why a lot was riding on that hope. So when Warner Bros. Announced about a month ago, hey, we're going to simultaneously release Wonder Woman 1984 in the theaters and on HBO Max simultaneously, that's it. Theaters are dead.
I saw that coming. It was I can't remember now. You'll have to help me here. What's the Disney movie that Disney put straight to their Mulan? So when that came out, there was some discussion on some different YouTube channels. I saw they're like, "Is this the end of movie theaters?" And it basically came down to pure economic sense. They went, Disney owns the rights. They're releasing their own content, and I think it was $30. I might be wrong on that. I think it was $30 to buy, and the idea is that all of a sudden Disney realized how many buys they got. It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous how many people bought it, and you start to think, well, all these people have been investing for more and more years and years. Getting 5.1 surround sound in their home. 65-inch TVs are now practically almost like the minimum. Like it used to be 55, and I feel like people go to the minimum 65. You're pretty well set up. All of a sudden, you think about, I could spend $30. Especially post-COVID, spend $30. I'll have some people come over. We'll all sit in my living room. We don't have to go to the movie theater. We don't have to go spend the money on popcorn. It doesn't have to turn into a $200 night. Spend $30. It's like a UFC fight. You split it amongst your friends and your relatives. You sit down, you watch it, and Disney gets pure profit. They're not going to split it with the theater companies. And I think the light bulb went off. I think they kind of saw that whole image of where people have been going, what they like to do, kind of economic sense of it. And just like I think in every other venue, music and movies, people are willing to put off. And you look at like streaming services, and especially where music went from the 90s to 2000s, people are willing to put off quality for convenience. But now, really, the quality gap is not as large as it used to be. People don't have a 32-inch screen TV at home. They really have what are you missing? Well, I have a pretty good setup at home. I've got a big screen TV, 4K HDR, got my 5.1 surround sound set up. I got Dolby Atmos. I have speakers in the ceiling now, and it's going to bounce off. I don't have to go out to the theater. I don't have to pay for the overpriced popcorn. As a moviegoer, it would be extremely unfortunate to me. I feel like people would be missing out on the experience of that. But I think even I have to admit that there are certain types of movies that I would see that I don't feel that I would be missing out if I didn't see them in a theater. Say I don't know, maybe dialogue-heavy dramas or something like that. That I go, you know what? I could see that streaming at home. Maybe call someone over, split the price. Not wait for it to, just buy it. Pay a $30 ticket and watch it, and not feel like I missed out. And that theaters will be reserved for these marquee movies. Like Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame's coming out. It's an event movie. You're going to go to the theater to see that, but you're not going to go to the theater to see, I don't know, the little family drama, like what's that movie that like my Greek friend's wedding or something like that. My big Greek, I can't remember the title, but some like little family drama like that. You're not going to go out to the theater to see that, and the theaters they'll be like one or two reserved. They'll be in the big cities, and they'll be reserved for these kind of big item movies. Like you go, oh my gosh, they're, like I said, Avengers Endgame, something that everyone's waiting for. And unfortunately, I do see that kind of going the way, and I don't see people fighting for it either. I see people actually being okay with that. So yeah, I think this probably will signal the end of movie theater experiences as we know it, probably over the next year or two.
Probably, but then there was that problem last year with HBO Game of Thrones fans that 10-year build up to the giant battle and you couldn't see a thing.
What would
And
they call that? The long night, or the
the
long
long
whatever that
night,
episode.
yeah.
Yeah.
I would say the long darkness because there was nothing to see there. And then would the HBO say, "Oh, that wasn't our problem. It was your problem for not having a 4K TV." Like, what?
Well, there's a little bit of truth to that. That obviously, certain dark scenes are obviously played much better on certain types of TVs. But if the cinematography is done right, it should not look that bad on an average person's TV. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, like I said, we'll end up seeing what ultimately happens there. But overall, Tenet is a movie worth giving a second chance to, particularly because people have the control in their hands at home now, whereas before. And
I think people, like I said, I'll have to see what I feel. I think there will be those of us that enjoy it more actually watching it at home. In terms of just, like I said, you can turn the subtitles on if you really need to pause it for a second to not kind of lose, like you need to think about something, make sure you're still tracking. So I am interested to see how my experience differs. Like I said, watching it at home, where I can just kind of focus on it, because like I said, it's hard to underestimate the problem that the dialogue had on me. I was really aware of it like 20 some minutes into the film, and I was annoyed already, and that's obviously not good when you're 25 minutes in and you're slightly annoyed, and you're aware that you're annoyed, that you feel like you've missed stuff that you should have gotten. Obviously that affects your how you feel at the end of it. So I'm definitely willing to give it that, but I'm also not going to let Nolan completely off the hook on that. That is on him, man.
It is on him. I just kind of gave up when he wasn't listening. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll accept that that's what you do. But it's interesting that I didn't put two and two together until just now, that there is a director who I did not enjoy his movies in the theater. I enjoyed it better at home. Ridley Scott. I fell asleep during Gladiator.
Oh gosh, during Gladiator?
Yeah, that's partly because
I guess that answers the question. Are you not entertained? Andres Segovia was not entertained in the theater.
My friends gave me the play-by-play of every single scene and dialogue of the entire movie after the battle. The only thing that didn't spoil was the climatic finale of the duel between the Emperor and Maximus. That's the only thing I didn't know about. So I'm like, oh, okay. But yeah, I fell asleep in that movie. The other movie I did not enjoy, I don't know if I told you this, I did not enjoy Black Hawk Down in the theater. I didn't. I thought it was
gosh.
But when I saw those two movies on the second viewing at home sometime later, I'm like, wow, these movies are really, really good. So to keep on the trend of my issues with Ridley Scott, Kingdom of Heaven. That's because the theatrical version sucked. I had the director's cut.
Yeah.
And
that surprised me about Black Hawk Down, though. If anything, it seems like that's such a, I don't know, what I consider a theater-specific movie, because
that and Gladiator.
Sound and the
Coliseum. Yeah, but I don't. Well, the Gladiator, because the whole story was spoiled for me, and I'm like, okay, I'm not really interested. Oh, this is where that happens. This is where that happens. And I fell asleep. Whereas Black Hawk Down, like I don't know what detracted me from the film, because I definitely enjoyed We Were Soldiers considerably more thereafter. But then when I was able to give the Black Hawk Down a second viewing, in a better context, I'm like, dude, this movie's so good. So yeah, I don't know. Might have been the music. I was annoyed at the time. I was very strict on what kind of soundtracks I wanted to hear in my movies. So that could have been a knock on Black Hawk Down. But now it's like, no, the experimental soundtrack works for it. So
I realize we didn't talk about that. I think that was maybe that was a knock maybe on Tenet that kept me out of it, because I'm like you. I'm very in tune with the soundtrack. The soundtrack is a huge thing for me. I realize in almost all of my favorite movies, I'm rather passionate about the soundtrack or the musical score that's used in them. And I got done with Tenet. I don't think I could have pulled out anything that really stuck out to me about it. And there's some musical scores that Nolan has used that I've been huge fans of. So like I said, it's another one of those things I'm going to pay attention to it when I rewatch it. Like, did you love the Tenet soundtrack?
There's some great moments in that soundtrack, particularly because it didn't feel like a different composer, even though it was, because Hans Zimmer was on another project. So this is the first non-Hans Zimmer soundtrack that Nolan has used since The Prestige. So I'm like, this sounds going to be different. No, it sounded quite a bit like a Hans Zimmer / Dark Knight thing, because there was some Joker vibe in it, but there were some excellent moments that I think harken to Inception. That would be The musical cue when they're gonna crash the 747, and the cue is called 747. The other cue was um, the the heist scene on the freeway. That was pretty good. And the expected countdown sequence, because if we're running out of time, that means we're gonna have a song that's kind of playing to running out of time, and that the song is called um, I think it's called the Protagonist. It's like an 11-minute cue that counts down for the final sequence when he and the lady Cat they're in the inverted machine, and Neil's gone. It's like, where's Neil? It's like, oh, he's probably gone through already. And the clock starts there, and it just starts crescendoing to the climax, which I thought was really serviceable. But when I heard some cues on it, it's like, wait a minute, this thing has sound design in it that plays into the movie. There is a sound design that I thought was part of the film, but it's actually part of the soundtrack for the villain, where it's kind of tipping off a little bit that this guy is kind of either in part of the future or he's on to the future and putting it into the present where they are now. And it's like a respiratory sound, like a struggling respiratory sound. That was actually part of the soundtrack. At least it's either part of the movie and a soundtrack at the same time, but on its own, I think it's part of the soundtrack that was done on purpose, that was put into that. Now, here's the really trippy part. There's two versions of the soundtrack. You kind of see where this is going. Forward, you can play it backwards too. That's pretty cool. You can find it on YouTube. Official releases. You can hear it any way you want. So it's like, whoa, this is a soundtrack in reverse, huh? So that should be interesting, because I think there was a pattern that Ludwig did on purpose there. So there were some musical cues, and they kind of get earworm. They stay stuck in there. It's like, okay, you got me here, because I didn't think I was going to enjoy the soundtrack at all, because it's not my style. But it definitely fit for what it was doing. But that's the problem. Think of an action-packed Inception, like the main fanfare of Inception, constantly. That's why it drowns out the dialogue. It's like, yeah, I know it sounds cool, but we don't need Travis Scott eventually shouting at us. So
it's funny because you weren't a huge fan, maybe I'm getting this wrong, of some of the Interstellar soundtrack. Because I actually,
that one.
Didn't you have a problem with the organ or something they used? You weren't a fan of that, or am I getting that wrong?
No, you're getting it wrong. I think that's Hans Zimmer's best soundtrack since The Thin Red Line. That one's absolutely gorgeous.
I must be confusing it with something else you said. For some reason, I'd always thought that you had said that you had an issue with
Dunkirk.
How
that's the one I had.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm confusing with that.
Yeah. No, but yeah, so I think the movie on the whole works. And I think when people give it a proper viewing with their own equipment, I think they're going to enjoy it a lot more. The sound mixing really hurt the movie, just as it tends to do for Nolan movies. But in this case, Inception, heavy on the exposition. Tenet, one can argue the whole thing is exposition, but it's not, because they say the concepts were not explained. The mission was, not the concepts of what is playing into or factoring into the film.
Which I was fine with. If I had one criticism of Inception, and I said Inception worked for me. It's one of those movies that I can acknowledge a lot of its flaws, and like a lot of movies, when you like what you like, their stuff drowns out. For whatever, Inception just kind of works for me. But I didn't like the fact, I was aware more in retrospect that I was like, gosh, they really had to have characters explain a lot throughout the movie, and I don't like that. And I understand every filmmaker has that dilemma, whether you're doing stuff with time, or it's a medical movie or a military movie, and you go, people aren't going to understand this. I hate this in movies about like economics or stockbrokers. There's always a scene where a character pretends to be amazed by someone explaining something to them that someone in their position would have learned, like going through college, and they have to pretend like they're just like blown away by it. Like, if you do this, then the price will go up. My gosh, you're amazing! You're telling it's something like there was I don't know if you ever saw the movie Margin Call.
No.
Don't watch it then.
I didn't see the entire movie. I only saw parts.
It has Kevin Spacey in it, but it's the single worst movie I've ever seen for this principle. The movie is absolutely filled. It's also like they decided one thing, that we're going to pretend every character in this movie knows absolutely nothing about economics. So it's filled with characters constantly telling other characters, pretend that I don't know anything about economics and explain it to me. You have like CEOs of companies saying, explain this as you would to a small child or a dog. But they do it like scene after scene. Like Kevin Spacey's character, constantly throughout the movie, he's supposed to be like, a senior like in the company, and he does nothing but I hate the technical mumbo jumbo. Just give it to me in plain English. And he says it like 5 or 6 times. Like, I've never seen a movie pull that card that many times and not trust the audience to understand a single thing. So no. So if there's anything, that's a point in favor of Tenet, because I get so sick of filmmakers going, okay, we have to explain. It just drags down the movie. I get like a little bit. Sometimes you have to put something in, but yeah. So I was happy that he did that. That was a point in favor of the movie. I was like, just let it play. I was almost like, I was glad that they kept the grandfather paradox conversation kind of short. It's like, you snuck it in there, you talk about it, and then move on.
Talk about it, damn it, debate it.
I almost would have been fine if they never would have said it, or if they would have done something that just like implied it. But at least they said it quickly, and then they moved on. Mm-hmm. So I was okay with that. Yeah. And there was no scene where the characters just sat down to really like, I know we're in the middle of this big chase, but let's talk about the concept of time travel and like hand it to so I was happy about that. The pace just kind of kept moving, because those characters would never have just in the middle of that sat down to let's grab a cup of Earl Grey and let's talk about the nature of time.
Yeah. No, well, you give it a second viewing, but
I will. I'm gonna see.
To enjoy something of that kind of complexity, where technically you need the exposition. I think I told you about this one, because in that movie, Primer, which is a complex movie in and of itself.
I love that movie.
So now I love Primer. So take Primer, turn it into an anime, stretch it over 26 episodes, and talk about possibilities and choices and moral dilemmas that occur because of that. Steins Gate, not Steins Gate Zero. Steins Gate is the absolute. It's a masterclass in theoretical physics, in quantum mechanics, time travel, and parallel universes. But it's grounded. That's what makes it so impressive. In an anime that could do anything it wants with it, but it's grounded as possible. And some people find a bit of the first 2 episodes kind of like a slow burn. Nope, because once it gets you, you are hooked. And then once it really gets going, it's like, okay, you're getting at me here. Especially when a character that made a decision that's altered the course of his reality. It's like, okay, so how do I go back to where it was? I gotta be very careful in retracing my steps. So it's a gorgeous thing, especially when the characters are forgetting why they attempted to get there in the first place. So it's like, dude, this is so good. So it's really good, because towards the very end, for those on DVD or whatever, you actually have a choice for the finale. You can, all right, the characters make a decision, this decision or that decision. So which ending do you want? So like, oh, dude,
just like those books I loved as a kid. You get to pick. You get to pick your own ending.
Yeah, so you get to pick your own ending, and that's what's awesome. There is the particular ending for the story, and it continues on in some extra episodes that didn't make the show, but they concluded with the film. So they're telling you this is the story that we chose to go with, but here's the alternate. Should he have given the other choice, what would have happened? So it's a gorgeous thing, man. That's an absolutely gorgeous thing. And after watching Tenet, I'm like, oh, I gotta watch Steins Gate again. Every time I see anything touching on that, I'm like, Steins Gate. It has to be Steins Gate. And you have to watch it in the Japanese subtitles. I mean, the Japanese with the subtitles, because the performance is there. It really drives home the emotion. Oh man, and the music.
Well, if you like Primer, or if it's like that, I'll definitely give it a shot. Primer did the very thing we were just talking about. They made the decision in their pre-production. They went, "Are we going to explain this to the audience?" And they went, "No, they'll figure it out." And there's just heavy, extended periods of dialogue where they're just going back and forth, just talking about like the construction of it and talking about things. And it's pure technical jargon.
Yeah.
But I don't see. I think it proves the principle. I was like, even if you're not getting all of it, you get it, because if you do the tone shifts in the conversation correctly, the ebb and flow, you'll still get what they're talking about. So you can do dialogue that there's some people that aren't going to track all this, but if you do it right, you can get the end of the conversation. Go, I still know what they meant. It won't lose you. And they also don't have any real scenes in that movie where they sit down to actually really talk about the nature of things. They allude to things like, aren't we doing this? But there's no scene that, like, the writer goes, we need a scene where they discuss the philosophical implications. It's naturally kind of, interweaved, where characters, they'll get angry, they'll be like, well, then what does this mean? But it's just like a throwaway. It's not segue to a monologue or something like that. I think that's I feel like that's the template that other people should use on how to do those movies. Just trust the audience and worry about the blocking and the structure of the scene, and people will figure it out still. Instead, they put so much into making sure that the dialogue is right, and then you ruin it, because then you give the actor dialogue that they have trouble working with, and it makes it harder to cut the scene back and forth once you've stuck them with this unnatural, dialogue or monologue.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of also goes to that point of Tenet, because in that movie, the protagonist had to avoid their past selves when they were trying to correct things. So their past and their current and future were in. I guess the past and the future were present at the same time. It's like, okay, careful with manipulation. We cannot expose ourselves to that. It's like they look at each other through the binoculars. All right, there I am. There I'm going. Or talking through and recreate. All right, we're going to recreate this. Wear this earpiece and we'll walk you through it just as it happened. It's like, yeah, that's Tenet. That's literally the final scene. It's like, okay, how many times did you guys attempt this? Because it's all the breadcrumbs are there for anyone that's followed something like Primer. And it's like, okay, how many times did they fail? In that case, they got it. Like, okay, we're going to get it this time. And in Tenet, we're alluded to that they had tried this many times. And the only conclusion to make it work out was, Neil, you got to die. So that's
and I said that was good, because that's the problem they run into in Primer, because they try to reconstruct the things over and over. And one of them is the guy goes up and he invites the guy to a party, but he shoots a basketball, and in real time you see that he makes it. And of course, in subsequent, when he revisits the scene, sometimes he makes the shot, sometimes he doesn't make the shot when he goes. And it changes the dynamics of how the scene plays. Like when he doesn't make it, the guy makes a comment, I think about it, and that he has to still try to get the dialogue in there. Hey, you should come over tonight, and just seeing how you can't perfectly replicate it, and but you're trying to get it to go, one way to still recreate the outcome of the event that you want. Like I think Primer was the guy had to go to the party because that's where he confronts the guy that was like angry at his girlfriend. It was something like that, and the guy had to get to that party.
Yeah. And that's where it, I guess it all culminates in, it's not mentioned in Primer, it's not mentioned in Tenet, but it's an understood for anybody that studied these things. It's all the butterfly effect. It's literally all it. It's like, if you don't do this right, you're going to keep changing things. So, yeah. Steins Gate doesn't do that, though. They don't really touch on the butterfly effect like that, because the character's consciousness is traveling forward in time. So he's got to that point. It's like, okay, how do I undo things? And trying to recreate things, he's stuck in a loop. So if he's stuck in a loop, it's like, this is not working. The end result continues to happen. So what do? The only way you know how. Undo in order from the point where you were to go back and undo it all. And you have to be careful in how you undo it so you don't affect that future. The future that you're trying to avoid, you got to make sure that you're preventing it from ever happening. So it's complicated. It's wonderful to behold, and it never gets boring too, because every time it's like, dude, this still didn't work. Like everything that he's like different things that he's trying to like, that didn't work. So how do we do this? Like, well, it's obvious logical conclusion. Undo in order everything that you did that got you there, and the learning curve that came with that. That's what you could do with anime that you can't really do with a movie. So that's what makes it beautiful. But yeah, definitely worth watching. Anyway, brother, thank you so much. It's good catching up with you on this Christmas Eve when we're recording this. Yeah, it is recording. And, it's still a great conversation about all this. That I think we both yield to each other. We found middle ground on ultimately what this is, and I think the conclusion is the same. Tenet is the best and worst of Nolan.
So real quick, where do you after seeing, because you've seen it a couple times now, where do you put it?
Where do I put it?
In his
repertoire
filmography.
films.
Yeah.
It's not.
I'm gonna refrain because I haven't seen this in time. I'm gonna wait.
I can't rank it because it's too soon. I haven't seen its impact yet on either me or anyone else. Right now it's just been enjoyment. So I need a little more time to digest it. So I'll see where it ultimately falls. Like Dunkirk, it took me a while to digest that one too, to see it for its ultimate strengths. And I thought, wow, this is a lot more masterclass of filmmaking than I give it credit initially. Some people saw it for what it was. I was not one of those that immediately saw it for what it was, because the sound mixing and the soundtrack just were too jarring. But then having seen it at home with my kids and all that, like, where my kids understood what was happening without even really understanding what they're saying. It's Nolan. That was Nolan's intent. It didn't matter if you understood English or not. That you'll be able to understand the situation.
I know some people think Dunkirk is his masterpiece. I think Quentin Tarantino's in that crowd.
Yeah, he did say that. He said he was really impressed by it. He even talked about it recently. So I need Tenet to digest a little bit, as I'm gonna deconstruct it a little more, because I feel like I still need to. But we're talking about major classics on Nolan for the top 5 already. That's just tough to crack. So
Yeah, I would say, maybe we should say this, because we've done kind of a lot of back and forth critiquing. When we're critiquing Nolan, it's a little bit different. This isn't about like trying to be kind of snobby and critique him. His films are worth critiquing. They're very much artistic endeavors. They're artistic endeavors that can still appeal to the masses. I mean, he really pulls off a unique trick. In some ways better than, say, like Stanley Kubrick, who he gets compared to a lot, in that he does movies that still can manage to appeal to wide range of people, make lots of money, and yet he kind of gets to do what he wants, do concepts, play around with film structure that no other director would be allowed to, because like that's not what our surveys say an audience wants to see. That's not what they like. They're not going to understand this. They're not going to understand that. And it's a rare thing that someone like him just really gets carte blanche to go, I'm going to do this thing that might be highly confusing. It's not structured like anything that you would normally market. And here's $150, $200 million. Go make your movie, and you pretty much have final cut. It really is a rare thing. So, critiquing a Nolan film, it's because the anticipation is really high, and that I would say even the ones that I'm critiquing, it's not like critiquing other movies. It's still, I don't think there's been really any of his that I've really not enjoyed. There's more just that whenever he makes a movie, it could be this. It could be up here when he does it. So it's an incredibly high expectation when he does that. I'd say maybe there's only been maybe one. I might be in the crowd that I go back and forth on The Dark Knight Rises. I've been both a defender of it, where I thought people were too critical, and then I've seen it and then gone, oh yeah, maybe they were right. I don't know.
Yeah, so I'd say they're both right, because other than that, it still has a cultural impact, because it's the dialogue, the plot, the driving plot of it is just, it speaks to our times. The dialogue is just so great when it comes to just focusing on the villain's mission, but overall in his execution, the continuity errors and the what seemingly feels rushed in editing, a moment of just Nolan-esque editing fixes the whole thing. That's what I always said. The unfortunate part is that in fixing it with editing, you might have to sacrifice the opening scene with the airplane. Other than that, it's a solid film. But yeah, I'm gonna need a little more time to digest Tenet, to see where it ranks in all things. But as someone that's just a sucker for this kind of content, well, you just look at the body of work that he's done with the subject matter. To some extent, Inception, he does manipulate time there, but because of the dream space. Interstellar, he's dealing directly with theoretical physics. And then you take quantum mechanics with Tenet. So he's already touched upon everything that I absolutely love. So among the three, it's going to be 3. So in Inception second and Interstellar first, the way he structured all of it. But there are very different sections of science that he touches on each of them. So, yeah, like I said, Tenet is more heavy on the quantum mechanics, in my opinion. Interstellar is theoretical physics and time manipulation, not time travel, just time manipulation in the dream space with Inception. So that you see what he wants to do. That's why a lot of us like, can you just give us your vision of a time travel movie? So now they got their answer. If he does it, they're not going to like the answer because they just saw Tenet. And those that enjoyed it will want to see it. Those that didn't enjoy Tenet because of its high concept will hate his time travel movie. It's not going to be a Back to the Future. It's just not.
No, there won't be hijinks like Back to the Future, but I don't know. I kind of feel like maybe he's taken that subject. I kind of get the feeling that his next project is going to be something totally unrelated, and
I
that
don't think he's going to touch
he probably won't.
No.
He'll come back to it eventually because you can just tell it's a subject he's drawn to. But I think he'll put a movie, maybe even 2 movies in between before he comes back to a script probably that he likes to come back to. Something
He's
like that.
not his brother. He's not going to make those mistakes. His brother hit the ball out of the park with Westworld Season 1. If you really want to see all those concepts that I talked about, it's right there. If you haven't seen Westworld Season 1, that's the only one worthwhile watching. Just watch the first one and leave it at that. Just, that is what I'm talking about. And with a climax that is just, wow. It's just absolutely incredible. It's philosophical. It's physical. It's scientific. It deals with everything, man. And it deals with oh my goodness. What is that expression? Something that's having to do with the birth of consciousness. But most of all, it's like, what is life? Is basically the question is being asked. Because in this story, the protagonists are robots that are discovering themselves. And that's what I hate. But it's also a metaphor for God creating man. It's touched upon really heavily there. So it's like, like, yeah, but you're giving too much credit to mankind thinking they can create life, in this case artificially, and say, well, because it can think for itself, therefore does it mean it's life? It's an excellent question that's worth asking philosophically. I know the answer. If it doesn't have a soul, it doesn't have a soul. There's a soul makes all the difference in the world. But now we're entering the conversation about what happened with clone humans. Do they have a soul? Like, well, now we're really getting into complex stuff. But this is not talking about cloning. This is talking about humanity and its creation, robotic intelligence. Is it life? Should we give it the same kind of, afford it the same kind of rights as we would a human? But the way it's played out is just, violent delights have violent ends. It's so good. That's why, what the hell did Jonathan Nolan, and Lisa Joy do with season 2 and 3? They bent the knee to the woke mob and ruined what could have been the next great thing for HBO. I gave up on that show, man. I skipped season 3. There's no hope for it. Season 4, I don't care. It went way off the wayside. But season 1, there's so much to digest there. It's so good. But anyway, that might be my call for me to go though. So thanks very much for connecting, brother.
Absolutely. Good to talk to you.
And that does it for my conversation with Travis. So there were a couple of things, as I mentioned at the intro to the podcast, that I wanted to clarify. So I'll clarify them here. And that's with respect to who the cinematographer of choice tends to be for Christopher Nolan and who did the cinematography for Tenet. So the cinematographer I was referencing was Wally Pfister. He had since gone not just doing cinematography to move on to directing his own movies. So that's the cinematographer that I was referring to during my conversation with Travis. So in his case, the last film that he and Christopher Nolan did together was The Dark Knight Rises. So I was right, it was one of those Batman movies, but I forgot that in between those movies was Inception. So The Dark Knight Rises was the correct movie that I should have referenced in terms of that. Every movie since then, since The Dark Knight Rises, Nolan has been using his cinematographer Hoyt van Hoytma. I hope I pronounced his name right. And I'm actually surprised that he did Tenet, because I did feel it was a bit different from his work with Dunkirk and Interstellar. So I would have to put more of the blame on Nolan then for some of the caveats I have with the cinematography of Tenet. But other than that, it's just a great overall piece. Now, there is one thing that I didn't mention regarding the whole entirety of my issues with dialogue that was actually summarized in one key sequence that has been the most talked about before the movie came out and was changed before the movie came out, and that is The Dark Knight Rises. Because with The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, Nolan released the prologue to each of those movies in the IMAX, accompanying different Warner Brother properties several months before the actual release of those films. In the case of The Dark Knight Rises, there was a lot of complaints that people did not understand what Bane was saying. So it's like, dude, what the flip is this guy saying behind a mask in a loud airplane? That was the only time I guess you could point to Nolan responding to the criticism and then having to do a redubbing of the dialogue for the theatrical release, which is horrendous. But just giving you an FYI that it's become that big of a gripe with Nolan movies. It's reaching its tipping point. I think that Tenet should be that tipping point where Nolan has to finally address it properly and deal with it. Anyway, I don't want to get long-winded. This has already been a very epic podcast, so thank you so much for listening. If you want to check out more of my stuff, by all means, go to my website, www.theundersegovia.com. Check out the other stuff from Off the Record that you've been missing out on, especially before the end of the year, because you have access to all that without having to register. So check it out, all the different corners that I do, including my Off the Record podcast, which is exclusively there, and I'll see you on the next one.